Story 1.
In that moment, as I hid between the old, forgotten crates, I wished to become one with them, sinking into the darkness that felt almost tangible. My back tensed instinctively in anticipation of a touch that seemed inevitable. The breathing of the monster, or so it appeared to me, disturbed the dead silence of the warehouse, weaving its foul note into it. This sensation penetrated through the skin, causing every nerve in my body to freeze in fear. Yet I understood. It was merely the play of my overactive imagination, spurred by fear. I had to find the strength to run, but the path to salvation remained hidden from me. The thought that a thin steel door could shield me from the creature's inevitable wrath seemed ludicrous. Nonetheless, I prayed without much hope that it would hold. How did it come to this? The thought flashed through my mind as I tried to calm my wildly beating heart. It all started 2 months ago. My name is Eric. I'm a guard, and my workplace is a typical prison on the state's outskirts, one among many that doesn't stand out in the endless list of similar institutions. My job is seldom anything exciting or unusual. Most of the time, I'm occupied with maintaining order and security, ensuring that all inmates are where they're supposed to be, according to the list on the board. This place, where I spend 8 hours of my life every day, boasts no architectural diversity or uniqueness in design. It's a collection of gray concrete blocks, topped with barbed wire that gleams in the sun like a sinister reminder of the freedom so unattainable for those confined within. Inside, narrow corridors echo footsteps, creating the illusion of presence where there is none. Cells, row upon row, serve as temporary homes for those who, for one reason or another, have lost their right to freedom. Choosing my profession was not a matter of chance. It was a kind of challenge to myself, a way to test my principles and beliefs under conditions far less comfortable than the cozy corner of my home. I aimed to understand if it was possible to maintain humanity when faced with its absence, and perhaps help someone along this difficult path toward self-discovery and redemption. My days in prison were monotonous, each new day mirroring the last. The morning roll call, the daytime rounds, lights out, all of it merged into the rhythm of my life, rarely disrupted by anything out of the ordinary. Yet, even in such routine, I found satisfaction, believing that my daily efforts, though small, could lead to significant changes in the lives of those surrounded by the prison walls. This continued until the day everything changed, the day that brought new challenges into my life and the life of the prison. The rain started before dawn, promising to make this day one of those that leave a mark on the soul, a somber reminder of the endless succession of monotonous days. Raindrops pattered on the roof of my old Ford as I approached the prison, mirroring my thoughts about the upcoming shift. The sky was heavy and overcast, casting a shadow over everything, including my mood. The parking lot in front of the prison was nearly empty. I got out of the car, took my umbrella, and headed towards the entrance, casually noting how the rain made the world around seem different, darker, yet somehow cleaner. My shoes slipped on the wet asphalt, distinctly reminding me of the morning's dampness. Passing through the security checkpoint, I greeted Jim, the entrance guard, who, as always, seemed unflappable even in such weather. "Another day, Eric," he called out to me as I walked past. In the locker room, I changed into my uniform and headed to my post. The day promised to be as unremarkable as usual, if not for one, but today, a new doctor was expected to arrive at the prison, as announced at the morning meeting. A young woman, Dr. Lilia Strong, the head of security announced, and I nodded indifferently, not expecting this to alter the monotony of my days in any way. After the meeting, I went on my usual rounds. The rain continued to drum on the corridor roof, creating a strange sense of isolation from the outside world. At that moment, it seemed to me that the prison was more than just a workplace. It was a separate world with its own rules, life, and even weather. The incident occurred closer to noon. 2 inmates got into a scuffle during lunch break. A quarrel over food quickly escalated into a fight. Myself and a couple of other guards were on the scene in an instant, trying to separate the fighters. One of the inmates received a minor wound from a makeshift knife. The situation was under control, but required medical intervention. That's when I saw her for the first time, Dr. Lilia Strong. She entered the room with a confidence and calmness that were immediately noticeable. Her gaze was focused and professional as she examined the wound. Our eyes met for a moment, and I noticed how quickly her eyes assessed the situation. She was indeed attractive, but at that moment, it was the last thing on my mind. After addressing the injury, Dr. Strong briefly spoke with the guards, giving necessary recommendations, and just as quickly as she appeared, vanished, leaving behind a sense of novelty in the usual rhythm of prison life. The rest of the day passed with the usual cares and routines, but thoughts of the new doctor occasionally surfaced in my mind. In the evening, as I sat in my car to return home, the rain had already stopped, leaving the world around refreshed and somehow clearer. 2 days after Dr. Lilia Strong joined our team, a new batch of inmates arrived at the prison. The weather, as if sensing the tension of the moment, started to deteriorate again despite the brief clearing. Strong winds drove clouds before them, heralding another storm. The procedure for receiving new inmates was strictly regulated. Upon their arrival, the first step was registration, which included collecting personal information, photographing, and fingerprinting. Then, the inmates were led to a medical examination conducted by Dr. Strong, among others. After that, they were issued prison uniforms and assigned a cell. For both the inmates and the prison staff, the day of new arrivals was always tense. The guards remained vigilant, ready for any surprises, as some of the newcomers tried to establish their own rules or even engage in conflicts with other inmates. Among the newcomers, there was one who particularly caught my attention. He was a middle-aged man with dark hair and a piercing gaze, seeming too composed for someone who had just found themselves behind bars. His name was Daniel Graves. According to the documents, he had been convicted for a series of brutal assaults, though he himself insisted on his innocence. His sentence was substantial, indicating that he was likely to spend the majority of his remaining life within the prison walls. The adaptation process for new inmates always varied. Some quickly found common ground with their cellmates, while others became outcasts or targets for aggression. The rules of conduct in prison were strict, though unwritten. Keeping calm, showing no weakness, avoiding conflicts with the guards and other inmates were among the primary ones. On this day, as the wind scattered the clouds, creating an illusion of chaos outside the prison walls, inside, a different order reigned. Inmates, already accustomed to their routine, watched the newcomers with interest, assessing them just as they were assessed in turn. Daniel Graves, however, seemed to show little interest in anything. It was as if he was immersed in his own thoughts, inaccessible to those around him. Like all new inmates, Daniel and the others went through all the standard procedures before being assigned to their cells. Ahead of them lay the first difficult days of adaptation, during which they had to find their place in the complex hierarchy of prison life. With the arrival of the new inmates, the atmosphere in the prison became even more tense. The weather continued to deteriorate, as if reflecting the general mood. Strong gusts of wind knocked against the windows and doors, creating the impression that nature itself was trying to penetrate inside and reveal all the secrets hidden behind these walls. One of my duties as a guard was to study the files of the newly arrived inmates. Reading through their files, I stumbled upon several shocking stories. Rick Johnson's story, in particular, stood out. He had been convicted of murdering his family, his wife, and 2 children. The court found him guilty of eliminating everyone who stood in the way of his happiness with his lover, Emily Watson. Other inmates also had interesting pasts. Michael Turner was convicted for a series of armed bank robberies, in which he acted with extraordinary cold-bloodedness and calculation. Thomas Riddle was convicted for large-scale fraud, victimizing hundreds of elderly people across the country. Alex Carter, a young man, landed behind bars for hacking government servers, causing serious disruptions in the operation of several state institutions. But it was Daniel Graves's case that raised the most questions for me. The deeper I delved into his story, the more contradictions and puzzling aspects I found. As I mentioned, he was officially convicted for a series of brutal assaults, but there were too many blank spots in the case. Some witness testimonies seemed fabricated, and the evidence appeared stretched. It seemed someone was very interested in seeing Daniel behind bars. After the arrival of the new inmates, the routine order of the prison was disrupted. Conflicts became more frequent, not only among the inmates but also between some of them and the guards. The newcomers were trying to find their place in the prison hierarchy, which inevitably led to friction. Contrary to my expectations, Daniel Graves kept to himself and did not engage in open conflicts, though his presence caused tension among the other inmates. I began to notice a change in the inmates' behavior. If previously most of them tried to blend in and keep as quiet as possible, now there was an air of aggression and anticipation of something inevitable. Even the atmosphere in the prison became more tense, as if everyone was waiting for the spark that could explode this powder keg. In recent days, as the storm hit our area with renewed force, strange things began to happen in the prison. The gloomy weather seemed to contribute to the increasing sense of unease enveloping the institution's walls. Nights became restless, and not just because of the thunder's roar and the wind's whistle outside the windows. The inmates were the first to speak of unusual sounds. They claimed to hear rustling, scraping, and even soft whispers echoing through the corridors deep at night. Some even insisted they saw shadows flitting past their cell doors when there should have been no one in the corridors. The situation escalated when the surveillance system started malfunctioning. Some cameras were knocked out by the storm, but others stopped working without any apparent reason. In a prison where every corner is supposed to be under constant watch, this became a real emergency. The prison warden ordered an increase in security and more night patrols, but this only added fuel to the fire of rumors among the inmates. One morning when I arrived at work, I was greeted with the news that several inmates had refused to go out for the morning walk. For prison life, this was unprecedented. Normally, any chance to spend time in the fresh air was seen by the inmates as a gift. However, now they preferred the relative safety of their cells over facing the unknown lurking outside. Questioning one of the inmates, who was usually more inclined to communicate, I tried to find out what exactly was causing such fear among them. "There's something out there," he told me, looking through the cell bars with evident anxiety in his eyes. "At night, it's not just sounds. Someone or something is walking the corridors. We see shadows that don't look human. They disappear as soon as you try to focus on them." His words made me think. On one hand, it could seem that the tense atmosphere and isolation from the outside world were leading to a collective psychosis among the inmates. On the other, too much in their words sounded convincing. I myself began to notice that night shifts had become somehow different, filled with the sensation of the presence of something inexplicable. Life in the prison went on, but now every rustle behind me made me look back. We, the guards, tried to keep the situation under control, not succumbing to the panic that was beginning to envelop the inmates. Let me explain to you in more detail. The night shift starts routinely. I check my equipment: flashlight, baton, handcuffs, radio. Before going out on a round, I make sure the connection with the central post is working flawlessly. During the night shift, there are fewer of us guards than during the day. Just 5 people for the entire complex. Each of us is responsible for our sector. And although the territory is vast, strict discipline and adherence to rules allow us to maintain order. My first task is to patrol the area. The patrol starts from the outer perimeter, slowly moving to the inner corridors. The flashlight in my hand feels heavy, its beams slicing through the darkness, revealing long rows of cells locked for the night. The rules demand attentiveness and constant vigilance. Any noise or movement must be immediately checked. This night did not promise anything out of the ordinary until I heard strange sounds behind me. Steps. No, not steps, but a light tapping of paws on the cold floor. I stopped, listening. Silence, broken only by my quickened breathing. Probably rats, I thought, but then realized by the sound that it was something bigger. Following the sound, I cautiously moved forward, my flashlight illuminating the empty corridors. Yet when I reached the place from where the sounds seemed to come, I found nothing. No trace of an animal, no signs of anyone's presence. Strange, I whispered to myself, feeling a chill run down my spine. Continuing my patrol, I was beginning to forget about the odd incident when suddenly, on the periphery of my vision, a shadow flickered. A black dog. But there are no dogs in prison, especially not large black ones. My heart skipped a beat. I directed the flashlight towards it, but there was no one there. The dog had vanished without a trace. I went to where I saw it, examining every corner, but to no avail. No trace of the animal, nor an explanation for its sudden appearance and disappearance. Returning to my duties, I tried to dismiss the uneasy thoughts. It's just fatigue, I reassured myself. However, deep inside, I knew it was something else. Something for which I could not find a logical explanation. The night slowly dragged on. I continued my rounds, every rustle making me tense. All the other security staff I crossed paths with seemed calm, but I felt fear. For the first time in years of working, I was experiencing a sense of fear. In the morning after my night shift, as the last shadows of the night melted under the rays of the rising sun, the prison greeted me with grim news. One of the guards had discovered a dead inmate in his cell, Rick Johnson, the very one who had been convicted of murdering his family. The cell was locked from the inside, with no visible signs of forced entry or struggle. Everything looked as though Rick simply lay down and died. But Dr. Lilia Strong, the prison doctor, quickly debunked this theory, stating that his neck had been broken with inhuman force. His face was frozen in an expression of terror, as if in his last moments he had encountered the embodiment of fear itself. The surveillance system, inconveniently, had malfunctioned again that night, leaving unanswered the question of what had happened in the locked cell. The prison administration immediately began an internal investigation, calling in all the security staff on duty that night for questioning, including me. I didn't see anything unusual, I repeated, though thoughts of the black dog I had seen wouldn't leave me alone. When I mentioned this, and about the inmates talking about nighttime noises and terrifying shadows in the corridors, my words were met with skepticism. The administration preferred to focus on more earthly explanations, refusing to believe in any supernatural phenomena. In the days that followed, due to the unknown nighttime noises in the corridors and the murder of one of the inmates. The situation in the prison intensified. The prison warden, sensing the growing tension among both the inmates and the staff, ordered an increase in security, adding another layer of checks and doubling the number of patrols at night. Yet even these measures could not quell the rising fear. Days passed, but no answers were found regarding the death of Rick Johnson. Each evening as I began my shift, it felt as though the prison walls were closing in tighter, and the darkness beyond them grew denser. The nighttime sounds that the inmates spoke of now seemed to me not just a figment of their imagination. They were something more, something that threatened us all. However, despite all my fears and doubts, I continued to fulfill my duties, trying to keep fear under control. I knew I had to remain vigilant. The wind howled outside the windows, thunder rumbled, and the rain poured down with such force that it seemed as though the heavens had opened all their gates directly above our prison. The storm that erupted over the world beyond these walls seemed eager to contribute to the already tense atmosphere. Despite the doubled attention to security measures, tranquility proved fragile. A conflict erupted among the inmates, like a lightning strike provoking an explosion of emotions and aggression. Two major prison gangs had snapped. The aftermath of this outburst was swift and brutal, with numerous injured chaos that we, the guards, had to suppress by force. After order was restored and we began to deal with the aftermath of the clash, an incident in the infirmary made me reconsider the boundaries of human nature anew. An inmate, whose past was shadowed by violence even before he arrived here, suddenly attacked Dr. Strong. I was nearby and without a second thought rushed to help. We managed to stop him before any irreparable harm was done. Watching Dr. Strong's reaction after the incident, I saw not fear but anger and disappointment in her eyes. It was more than just a response to the attack. It was the anger of someone who had come face to face with the darkness in another's soul. The inmate responsible for this incident was known for his propensity for violence, rumored to stem from his past as a fighter. In prison, he had been involved in multiple conflicts, affirming his reputation. He was hated but also feared. He was strong. Few could handle him. But what happened 2 days after the incident left us all in shock. Found dead in his cell, he was killed with such brutality that even the most hardened security staff could not hide their horror. He was torn in half. Part of his body lay on the floor of his cell, part hung from the ceiling. His death called into question everything we knew about security and control within these walls. The investigation into this case brought no answers, only deepening the questions that now hung in the air like a dense fog. Every day, starting my shift, I wondered, what would happen today? Who would be the next victim? Who was this mysterious killer? And why was he doing this? With each day passing within the walls of this prison, the air became more saturated with tension, as if the building itself was absorbing the anxiety and fear emanating from its inhabitants. It was like electricity, slowly accumulating before a storm, creating the sensation that a discharge could strike at any moment. We, the guards, felt this change too. Conversations at the water cooler or during breaks were no longer filled with jokes or tales of domestic concerns. They had shifted to short, tense discussions about recent incidents and rumors of an unknown threat. This sense of the unknown made us constantly look over our shoulder, even when we were sure we were safe. My own anxiety intensified with each passing day. During my rounds, I began to notice subtle changes in the behavior of the inmates. Some who were previously prone to aggression now seemed subdued, avoiding eye contact. Others, usually quiet, suddenly started showing signs of nervousness and restlessness. Their usual apathy towards the surrounding world was replaced with something else. In their eyes, there was not only the tiredness from the monotonous days spent in confinement, but also an anxious anticipation. Conversations that used to fill the dining halls and recreation areas had quieted, as if everyone was afraid to draw attention from an invisible enemy. All the guards felt the looming threat, but no one wanted to appear weak by admitting their fear. At morning meetings, our glances met, full of questions no one could answer. With each day, it became harder to maintain an appearance of control and order when anxiety was growing inside each of us. The day I was scheduled to be on duty with Tom started off as usual, but an inner premonition already warned me of the impending trouble. Meeting Tom solidified all my doubts about him into a clear picture. His reputation was known to everyone in the prison. Cruelty towards inmates, disrespect towards colleagues, and worse, his recent actions towards Dr. Strong. All of this together painted a picture of a man you'd want to stay away from. Tom was the type of guard who found pleasure in demonstrating his power over those he deemed deserving of punishment. His methods were crude and thoughtless, often crossing the boundaries of what was permissible. Rumors of his mistreatment of inmates circulated throughout the prison, but his actions against Dr. Strong drew particular attention. His harassment and indecent comments towards the young doctor were outright disgusting, and although Dr. Strong maintained her composure, her looks sometimes betrayed her inner tension. Preparing for duty with Tom was conducted in a tense atmosphere. I tried to focus on checking the equipment and planning the rounds, but his constant taunts and harsh comments about the inmates tested my patience. His crude laughter and disregard for safety rules only intensified my displeasure. I felt every joke he made, every disdainful glance towards the inmates or colleagues, made me despise him more and more. All this time spent in his company was a test, not only of my professional endurance but also of my personal beliefs. Observing his behavior, I questioned how such a person could end up among the guards. His actions and words, devoid of any respect for others, undermined the foundations of our work. Night fell, shrouding the prison in a deep darkness that seemed even denser and more impenetrable due to the clouds hiding the stars and moon. Tom, leading our security team during the night shift, took it upon himself to assign duties. However, his idea of leadership was limited to giving orders, shifting most of the work onto us, while he preferred to rest in the break room after several sharp and inappropriate comments towards other guards. His behavior filled me with deep disgust, but duty compelled me to focus on the night ahead. Through corridors lit only by sparse lamps, casting long shadows on the walls, I began my rounds. The echo of my steps filled the silence, lending each sound a special significance. In this setting, every rustle seemed like a sound of alarm, causing my imagination to paint the darkest pictures. As I passed by one of the sections closed for repairs, a shadow that resembled the silhouette of a large dog suddenly slipped out from the darkness. This sight was so unexpected in the prison corridor that I froze for a moment, trying to understand if my eyes were deceiving me. But instinct took over, and I gave chase, determined to once and for all ascertain the nature of this shadow. Racing through the corridors, I felt adrenaline fill my veins. This pursuit gave me strength and courage, allowing me to momentarily forget about the oppressive atmosphere of the prison. However, when I reached the place where I believed the shadow had headed, there was no one there. Only empty, silent corridors, where my breathing seemed too loud. As I tried to gather my thoughts and make sense of what had happened, my gaze fell on a figure at the end of the corridor. It was Dr. Strong, who apparently was not here by her own will. Her explanation that she had gotten lost seemed odd to me, given her usual knowledge of the prison corridors, but I did not delve into the details. Escorting her to the infirmary, I noticed her grateful look, which, at that moment, seemed to me the only bright spot in the night. Returning to my duties after this encounter left me with a renewed sense of vigilance. Although I had not found the source of that shadow, the chase for it and the unexpected meeting with Dr. Strong added a particular shade of mystery to the night. At dawn, as the first rays of the sun barely pierced through the heavy clouds, the prison seemed to pause in anticipation of another routine day. However, this day began with a new tragic event. Tom was found dead. His body was discovered in one of the abandoned parts of the building, far from the main corridors and cells. The death of a guard within the prison walls is a tragedy in itself, but the circumstances of his demise turned this event into a true nightmare. Tom's body was not just dead. It was mutilated with such brutality that it was hard to imagine. Several blows, apparently inflicted by a blunt object, had turned his face into an unrecognizable mass. Marks on his neck suggested that Tom had been strangled before his death. This act of violence shocked with its inhumanity. The prison administration's response was immediate and decisive. Understanding that the death of a guard undermines the foundations of security and order within the institution, additional security measures were implemented, far stricter than ever before. All staff and inmates underwent a re-screening. Every corner of the prison was searched for weapons or other prohibited items. Surveillance camera footage was thoroughly reviewed, though it provided no clues as to who might be behind this murder. Night patrols were strengthened, and the number of guards on shift was increased. A double-check system was introduced for access to abandoned or rarely used parts of the building where Tom's body was found. Additional surveillance cameras were also installed at critical points to leave no blind spots. Every staff member underwent additional safety training, including how to act in extreme situations. The administration imposed strict restrictions on the movement of both staff and inmates around the prison premises at night. The investigation into Tom's death continued, but each new day only deepened the feeling of helplessness and fear. Since Tom was found dead, the atmosphere in the prison had only worsened. The bad weather that had been raging outside for several days seemed to underscore the gloomy mood, enveloping the building in a heavy gray shroud. Rain pounded on the roof tirelessly, wind howled in the corridors, and storms lit up the sky with bright flashes, adding a sense of apocalypse to everything happening. I even considered taking some time off, trying to convince myself that a little rest would help me cope with the overwhelming feelings of fear and helplessness. However, circumstances forced me to postpone these plans. After the murder of inmates, clashes between gangs, and the death of a guard, the prison had introduced a double reinforcement of security measures, invited officers from the police department, and conducted an internal investigation. All this significantly increased the workload on the guards, including me. During these difficult days, I began to notice Dr. Strong's strange glances. It seemed she was watching me. Initially, I attributed this to fatigue and stress, but over time it became clear her presence near me was not coincidental. She appeared in the corridors as I passed by, in the dining hall during meals, and even in the yard during rounds. Her looks were inscrutable, yet I felt a hidden interest or even assessment in them. This unnerved me and caused irritation, but I tried not to let this feeling take over, reminding myself of the need to maintain professionalism. Night shifts became particularly challenging. Mysterious sounds echoing from various corners of the building were amplified by the noise of rain and wind outside the windows, creating the illusion of the presence of something or someone else, besides us and the inmates. One such night, when the thunder roared so loudly it seemed the walls might collapse from its force. I saw Dr. Strong again. She stood at the end of the corridor, her figure outlined against the flickering light, watching me. I stopped, trying to understand what she wanted, but she simply turned and walked away, leaving me in contemplation. With each day, my job was filled with new challenges, and my thoughts increasingly returned to Dr. Strong's glances and to the shadow of the dog I had seen in the corridor. Uncertainty and a lack of understanding of what was happening around became my constant companions, forcing me to seek answers to questions that perhaps would be better left unattended. The workload, the unceasing bad weather, and stress took their toll on my health. One day, returning from duty, I got thoroughly soaked in a downpour. The next morning, I woke up feeling as if I had been run over by a truck. My body ached, my head was splitting, and I had a fever. Despite this, the duties of a guard did not allow for delays, and I had to go to work. During the day, I decided to consult with Dr. Strong. With professional detachment, she examined me, prescribed painkillers and aspirin, and dryly reminded me to take better care of myself. Her advice and medications provided temporary relief, but by evening, my condition worsened. The headache became nearly unbearable, and fever made the world around me seem to drift. Despite this, a night shift lay ahead. The weather outside was raging anew, with wind howling through the corridors and rain beating against the windows, as if trying to break through. I felt terrible but tried not to show my condition, continuing to perform my duties. During the night patrol, as I had begun to acclimate to the rhythmic patter of rain on the roof, a piercing scream suddenly shattered the silence. It was so unexpected and chilling that I instantly forgot about my malaise. Rushing toward the source of the sound, I moved through the corridors faster than ever, straining every muscle to overcome the aching in my body. Approaching the place from where the scream had emanated, I discovered a bloody trail on the floor. My heart sank with horror and tension, for each of us who stays to work through such a night knows blood in the corridors of the prison never bodes well. The trail led to a cell, the door of which was ajar. The darkness of the cell seemed almost tangible as I switched on my flashlight and directed its beam inside. Despite my fears, the cell was empty. No inmate, no corpse. Only chaos from overturned furniture and scattered personal belongings. This was the cell of Daniel Graves, the inmate whose case had always seemed fabricated to me, but Graves himself was nowhere to be found. The need for action was clear, but when I tried to call for backup through the radio transmitter, it unexpectedly failed to work. I always checked my equipment before starting a shift, but this time, due to illness, my diligence was not as thorough. Disappointment and fear seized me anew. Left without communication, I decided to act independently and headed to the nearest post to report the incident. As I navigated through the stormy ambience of the prison, the relentless downpour outside mirrored the tumultuous thoughts swirling in my mind. The absence of Daniel Graves and the eerie silence that now enveloped the cell block intensified the mystery surrounding the night's events. With each step towards the post, I pondered the possible implications of the scream, the bloody trail, and the vanished inmate, realizing that the night's occurrences could unravel the fabric of security and order we had struggled to maintain. The increased burdens of work, the ceaseless adverse weather, and the escalating stress had already begun to wear on my resolve. Now, faced with a situation that defied explanation and challenged our protocols, I felt a profound sense of responsibility weighing on me. This responsibility was not just to uphold the safety within the prison walls, but also to pierce the veil of uncertainty that this night had drawn over us. As I pressed on, determined to alert my colleagues and initiate a thorough search. The storm outside seemed to crescendo, as if nature itself was responding to the chaos unfolding within. The connection between the external turmoil and our internal strife was not lost on me. Both were forces of nature, unpredictable and often uncontrollable, yet deeply intertwined in their capacity to alter the course of our lives. My thoughts were abruptly interrupted by a terrifying sound emanating from the darkness behind me. It was a growl, deep and piercing, as if the night itself had found a voice. Cold sweat covered my back as I slowly turned around, trying not to succumb to panic. Before me stood a massive creature, resembling a dog or wolf, but its size surpassed any animal I had ever seen. It was larger than a human, and in its paws, it lifelessly held the body of an inmate. I recoiled, my heart pounding in unison with my rapid breaths. My legs gave way, and I fell, stumbling over some object on the floor. The fall stunned me for a moment, but the fear of the creature standing before me compelled me to try to get up. The beast looked at me, its eyes gleaming in the darkness, and its growl filled the space, making the air vibrate. I understood that I needed to act, but my body wouldn't respond, paralyzed by fear. The thought of the futility of running flashed through my mind. I tried to gather my strength to at least attempt to defend myself, but I knew my chances were slim. The creature continued to watch me, as if contemplating its next move. Then, in desperation and hopelessness, I remembered my flashlight. Slowly, trying not to make any sudden movements, I directed its light straight at the creature, hoping to somehow blind or scare it away. For a moment, it seemed that the light caused the beast to retreat, but it was merely an illusion. The intensity of the situation heightened as the creature and I faced off in the dimly lit corridor. The tension was palpable, a silent standoff where time seemed to stretch into eternity. My mind raced for solutions, knowing full well that conventional methods were unlikely to save me from this predicament. In a last-ditch effort to protect myself, I held the flashlight like a weapon, despite understanding its ineffectiveness against such a formidable opponent. The creature's steady gaze on me was unnerving, an acknowledgement of the gravity of our encounter. As the standoff continued, the storm outside roared louder, as if echoing the intensity of our confrontation. The sound of rain and wind against the prison walls added a surreal backdrop to the scene, a reminder of the world beyond our immediate crisis. My situation seemed hopeless when suddenly the noise of footsteps echoed through the corridor. The beast instantly turned towards the sound, giving me a chance to escape. Seizing the moment, I rose and, with whatever strength I had left, darted away from that terrifying corridor. Gasping for air in desperation, each step echoed in the empty corridors. The sounds of heavy footsteps and ominous growling behind me spurred me on, despite the sharp pains in my lungs and the acute ache in my side. Only one thought spun in my head: to flee, to escape this nightmare that seemed to have chosen me as its next victim. In a state of panic, I ran into a room filled with shadows of boxes and old furniture. After a quick survey, finding no better hiding place, I squeezed into the farthest corner behind the boxes. My heart pounded wildly, each beat resonating loudly in my ears. I tried to breathe quietly, but each breath sounded like an explosion in the deadly silence. I sat there until morning, tensely listening to every rustle, expecting the creature to discover my hiding spot at any moment. Fortunately, it never did. In the morning, other guards found me. Seeing them, I felt a wave of relief, but I was far from normal. I was pale, drenched in sweat, barely able to stand. My colleagues were shocked by my appearance and how I trembled with fear and cold. As I tried to calm down, they shared news about the tragic night. An inmate had been killed, and at first I thought it was Daniel Graves, whose body I assumed I had seen in the claws of the werewolf. However, to my surprise, I was informed that it was Graves who had disappeared, and the victim was another inmate, Thomas Riddle, known for his schemes against the elderly. This revelation stunned me with surprise and further muddled the situation. Moreover, it turned out that Dr. Strong had also disappeared. The news of her disappearance added grim details to an already unclear picture of events in the prison. What is happening behind these walls? How are the disappearances of Graves and Dr. Strong connected? Later, once I had somewhat recovered, an accidentally overheard conversation among police department officers revealed that there might have been some connection between Dr. Strong and Daniel Graves. This information made me ponder. Do I really know everything about the people I work with? What other secrets lie in the shadows of these walls? This series of events, marked by fear, mystery, and the unexpected, not only tested my resilience, but also forced me to question the very fabric of our reality within the prison. The disappearances, the inexplicable encounters, and the cryptic connections between individuals I thought I knew. All these elements wove a complex tapestry of intrigue and suspense that seemed to challenge the boundaries of my understanding. As I navigated through the aftermath, grappling with the weight of these revelations, I couldn't help but feel that the truth, however elusive, held the key to unraveling the mysteries that shrouded the prison in an ever-deepening enigma.
Story 2.
Walking through the corridors of Stanford University, I glanced into open office doors. Students were bustling all around. The time displayed 12:30. Usually the time when I would head to lunch with my friend Tanaka in the university cafeteria. However, he was nowhere to be seen today, and he wasn't answering his phone. It made me slightly anxious. Where could he have disappeared to? Just then, one of his students, Jennifer, walked by. I stopped her and asked, "Excuse me, Jennifer, have you happened to see Professor Tanaka today?" She confirmed that she had seen him in the morning in the laboratory. Grateful for the information, I quickly headed there. After a short walk, I reached the lab and upon entering immediately spotted my friend. He was completely engrossed in his work, staring intently into a microscope. I called out his name, but he didn't respond, so absorbed was he in his observations. What could have captured his attention so completely? Approaching cautiously, I touched his shoulder gently. Tanaka started, his eyes red as if he hadn't blinked for a long time, and an expression of surprise mixed with concern froze on his face. He realized it was me and let out a relieved sigh. "Oh, it's you, Daniel," he said, regaining his composure. "I'm sorry, I got completely lost in my work." His voice sounded somewhat distant, as if a part of his consciousness still remained in the microscopic world he was studying. "By the way, I'm glad you came. I have something to show you." He leaned over the microscope and, using a pair of tweezers, carefully extracted an object from it. Bringing it closer to my face, Tanaka showed me a pink petal, a cherry blossom petal, seemingly entirely ordinary and unremarkable at first glance. I looked at it with confusion, unsure of what I was supposed to see on this petal. Seeing my bewilderment, Tanaka smiled slyly, placed the petal back under the microscope, and invited me to take a look. With some skepticism, I leaned in to see what was there. Under the microscope's lens, I saw something frightening. Millions of thin threads, intertwining and writhing, formed not just a complex structure, but something akin to a living organism, filled with restless movement. These threads pulsed like the blood vessels of an unknown creature hidden within the depths of the petal.
Each sinuous thread seemed charged with dark energy, turning the entire petal into a maze with no way out. They resembled tiny worms or tentacles that could break free at any moment and coil around my finger. It seemed eternally hungry, eager to escape and spill into our world. Shocked, I recoiled from the microscope and asked in fear what it was. Tanaka, seeing my reaction, nodded with understanding. "I had a similar reaction," he began, his eyes reflecting a mixture of amazement and concern. "This petal was delivered to me in the mail. I have no idea from whom. The envelope only had a signature, Yakushima Island, Japan. When I opened it and found the petal inside, I initially thought it was some sort of joke. I was about to throw it away, but something made me look at it under the microscope. It was midnight, and I stayed at the university longer than usual. And when I saw what was hidden inside the petal, I nearly lost my composure. Believe me, it looks even more ominous at night." We were both in awe as we examined the petal, trying to unravel its mystery. There were many signs pointing to its extraterrestrial origin, but we couldn't be certain. On Earth, scientists discover around 50 new species every day, leaving room for doubts and speculations. Despite the vast number of known species, the world constantly surprises us, unveiling new mysteries, and this petal could be another discovery that would reshape our understanding. Glancing at the clock, I realized it was time to head to our lectures. We agreed to return to the lab after work and conduct a series of experiments with this unusual petal. The day flew by, but thoughts of the mysterious plant haunted me. As soon as the final bell rang, I practically rushed out of the lecture hall, much to the surprise of the students. Upon reaching the lab, I found Tanaka engrossed in an experiment. He was bent over the microscope, holding a pipette with which he carefully dropped various reagents onto the petal of the unknown plant. He began with the simplest plain water. However, there was no reaction. The microscopic thread seemed to repel the water, pushing it away without leaving the slightest trace. Looking into the microscope's eyepiece, I witnessed this astonishing phenomenon with my own eyes. The water, upon touching the surface, didn't get absorbed but rolled off, leaving no mark behind. Our curiosity grew, and like children enthralled by a new toy, we started testing various reagents. However, it seemed these threads possessed incredible resilience. None of our reagents, not even acids, could harm them significantly. When we tried pouring hydrochloric acid onto them, the reaction was so minimal it could hardly be considered one. It felt as though this plant behaved like an irritated cat being bothered during its sleep. The night passed in fruitless attempts to unlock the mystery of this petal. I tried touching it with my fingers and noticed a slight reaction. The petal seemed to be trying to envelop my finger, but an invisible barrier prevented it from doing so. Tanaka noticed this observation and was struck with inspiration. He carefully placed the petal back under the microscope, then, taking a small needle, pricked his own finger and dripped blood onto the petal. A reaction followed immediately. The petal eagerly absorbed the blood, much like a sponge absorbing water. We watched this under the microscope, unable to hide our horror. Millions of threads came to life with joyful and greedy movement, absorbing the blood. And as a result of this process, they became brighter, pinker, and appeared more elastic. This discovery left us perplexed and intrigued. Could this plant be a predator? Questions about the origin and nature of this plant, which reacted so actively to blood, involuntarily arose. Repeated experiments consistently yielded the same result. The petal, with an insatiable thirst, absorbed the blood without leaving a drop behind. Glancing at the clock, I saw that it was approaching 5 a.m., and the laboratory was still immersed in pre-dawn darkness. Despite the long hours of research, our enthusiasm remained unshaken. Tanaka, never losing his creative approach, suggested a new direction for our experiments, testing how the petal would react to various metals. We easily found the necessary samples in the lab and arranged them in a row. Copper, aluminum, iron, silver, and several other metals awaited their turn for testing. Upon contact with metals, the petal remained indifferent until we touched it with silver. This moment was a turning point in our experiments. As soon as the silver object approached the petal, the plant displayed an unexpectedly aggressive reaction. The petal started writhing and behaving as if it was energized by some invisible force. But each movement seemed to drain its strength, and it slowly withered before our eyes. This unexpected reaction to silver made both Tanaka and me exchange astonished glances. After dripping blood onto the petal once again, it seemed to resurrect, regaining its lost energy. However, when we approached it with silver once more, the plant again entered an aggressive state. These experiments continued until an unforeseen mishap occurred. At the moment when I brought the silver close to the petal and Tanaka was busy recording the reaction, my hand unexpectedly trembled, and a piece of silver fell directly onto the petal. It seemed to emit a piercing scream, though it was impossible to hear, but by its convulsions, we could tell it was experiencing agony. I didn't have time to remove the metal before it seemed to ignite and burn without flames, leaving only tiny ash fragments on the microscope slide. At that very moment, when the petal turned to ashes, the laboratory window burst open with a loud bang, piercing the silence of the night. A strong gust of wind rushed into the room, lifting paper sheets into the air and creating chaos on the work desks. It seemed some force was displeased with what had happened. Tanaka and I exchanged helpless glances. What were we going to do now, and who would believe our experiments? Our curiosity knew no bounds. Was this creation a living thing, a plant, or an animal? Or had we stumbled upon an entirely new species, previously unknown to science? Questions swirled in our minds, causing as much excitement as they did concern. We decided it was time to rest and collect our thoughts. With a heavy sense of unfinished business, we went our separate ways. The next day, we began investigating the only clue we had, the inscription mentioning the island. We found out that this island was located south of the main islands of Japan and, despite its remoteness, was inhabited. The island was famous for its ancient forests, where cedar trees, some over 1,000 years old, grew. It was also a popular tourist destination. On the calendar, it was June 5th, and during our discussions, we decided to complete our current tasks and head to Japan in August. Time passed quickly, and now we were at Tokyo's airport. From there, without wasting any time, we immediately took a domestic flight to Kagoshima, the city that served as the gateway to our ultimate destination. Upon arriving in Kagoshima, we headed to the port, where a ferry was already waiting for us. It was August 13th, and Japan was celebrating the holiday called Obon, a festival for honoring the deceased, which lasted for 3 days. During these days when people rushed to return to their hometowns, the queue for the ferry was simply enormous. Apparently, like us, everyone was eager to cross the sea in search of something important or simply to return home to their families. Standing in this endless line of waiting people, I couldn't help but doubt whether we would be able to board. Fortunately, luck was on our side. We managed to navigate through the crowd and, against all our fears, get onto the ferry. The people on board seemed happy, and an atmosphere of celebration filled the air. Tanaka looked around with curiosity. It was his first trip to Japan, as he was born in the United States in New Jersey. During the voyage, I started asking locals if they knew anything about a living sakura. However, they just shook their heads in confusion. When the ferry slowly entered the port on Yakushima, the first thing that caught our eyes were the outlines of dense evergreen forests that came close to the shore. The air was saturated with the scent of the sea and freshness, and the sounds of nature mingled with the hum of the arriving ship. The port turned out to be small but bustling. It was located at the mouth of a river that divided the town into two parts. People were bustling around, either meeting their relatives or, like us, preparing for the start of their adventure. Despite its modest size, the port was well organized, and every local we had a chance to talk to displayed friendliness and hospitality. In the port, we were greeted by a local guide we had hired in advance. She was a young woman named Haruko. She was only 20 years old, but her manner of communication and knowledge seemed far beyond her age. Haruko was of short stature, with long black hair that she neatly tied up in a bun. Her eyes were deep and clear, and her smile was so genuine that it immediately endeared her to us. When we asked Haruko about the living sakura, hoping that a local guide could shed light on our mystery, she replied negatively. Her lack of knowledge seemed both strange and disheartening to us. If even she, growing up amidst the island's mysteries and legends, had not heard of such a phenomenon, what chance did we have of finding it ourselves? Despite the brief disappointment, we decided to continue our search and set out to explore the town. It amazed us with its cozy and peaceful atmosphere. Narrow streets wound between low houses adorned with flowers and greenery. Small shops offering everything necessary for travelers and local souvenirs, as well as cafes, wafted the aromas of freshly prepared food. We also noticed that the streets of Miyanoura were preparing for the upcoming Obon Festival, also known as the Festival of Lanterns. Along the sidewalks, at the entrances to houses and in gardens, lanterns of various shapes and sizes hung, from classic paper ones to exquisite handmade ones, creating an atmosphere of enchantment and warmth. The light of the lanterns swayed in the evening breeze, casting dancing reflections on the ground and walls, giving the city a cozy and festive mood. Our guide told us that Obon in Japan is a time when, according to beliefs, the souls of ancestors return to the world of the living to visit their loved ones. People decorate their homes with lanterns to guide the souls and hold various events, such as Bon Odori, traditional dances around drums, to honor and entertain the ancestral spirits. As we admired the beauty of the city, it seemed that information about the living sakura was hidden from us in some mysterious way. Soon, Haruko led us to a narrow alley where time seemed to stand still. Ancient houses with traditional roofs and narrow cobblestone paths immersed us in a sense of the past. After walking down this alley, we stopped at the door of an old shop that seemed to bridge the gap between the present and history. Inside, we were greeted by an elderly man. He traded in various antique items, each of which seemed to carry a piece of the island's history. Shelves and racks were filled with ancient books, jewelry, porcelain, and a multitude of other things, each of which could tell its unique story. The elderly man, sitting behind the counter, observed us attentively, his eyes shining with curiosity. Haruko greeted him politely and introduced us. His name was Kiyoji. He was a true guardian of the island's stories, having lived here for all of his 90 years. When Haruko leaned towards him and asked something, her voice sounded respectful and clear, crossing the barriers of age and hearing. Kyoji, after briefly looking at us with surprise, paused for a moment in thought and then replied, "I haven't heard of a living sakura, but on our island there is a legend about a sakura tree that blooms eternally. They say it has spread in one of the mountainous groves, surrounded by ancient cedars. Access there is nearly impossible because the place is guarded by spirits. Legends claim that only one person has ever found it and returned, but that person lost their sanity. To reach the grove, guides are needed. They appear here during Obon, luring unsuspecting travelers into their trap. The islanders are well aware of them and avoid such encounters. The mysterious guides last appeared here about 20 years ago. If you're lucky, you might encounter them in the main square during the Obon festival." Glancing at Tanaka, we tried to understand who these mysterious guides could be and whether our upcoming adventure concealed unexpected dangers. Thanking Kyoji for his story, we headed to the square, determined to see for ourselves who these people were and whether it was worth venturing into the unknown with them. Arriving at the square half an hour later, we found ourselves in the heart of the evening fair. Joy and excitement filled the air. Lanterns softly illuminated the streets, adding a sense of festive charm. The fair was bustling with life. Local sweets, decorations, and toys attracted attention, and children enthusiastically darted between the stands, playing games and trying to catch fish. Our attention was also drawn to a small performance. A man in a devil's mask moved briskly from side to side, evoking laughter and delight among the spectators. People, laughing heartily, threw beans at him. It was an ancient ritual believed to drive away evil spirits and bring good luck. As we observed the festive hustle and bustle, Haruko drew our attention to two figures that immediately stood out from the rest. A small group of people had already gathered around them, dressed as travelers, while the local residents preferred to keep their distance. The first of them was dressed in a colorful carnival costume, his face hidden behind a red mask with a long nose, symbolizing some spirit. He appeared lively and mischievous, dancing playfully and attracting tourists to himself. In his hands, he held a sign written in Japanese, announcing a tour to the ever-blooming Sakura Grove. His behavior was so playful and childlike that it couldn't help but bring a smile to our faces. The second man, on the contrary, made a completely different impression. Tall and incredibly handsome, he was dressed in an elegant suit that made him look important and influential. Onlookers sighed and turned their heads as they passed by, unable to take their eyes off him. His posture was strict and majestic, and his gaze through thin glasses was piercing and evaluative. He held a notepad in his hand, carefully jotting down something, adding an aura of mystery to his presence. His appearance exuded danger, yet at the same time he was alluring and enchanting, as if beneath his stern facade lay profound secrets. Approaching closer, we caught the attention of the man in the formal suit. His smile, which blossomed instantly, was truly mesmerizing, although it also triggered some unease in us. With grace, he addressed us in flawless English, which was yet another surprise. "Good day, ladies and gentlemen. I see that our offer has caught your attention. My name is Kitsune, and my colleague is Yami. Would you like to take part in a tour to the magnificent grove where a unique sakura tree blooms endlessly, never withering a day? We depart in just half an hour, and there are only a few spots left. I would advise you to hurry." When Haruko inquired if it was safe to embark on such a journey at night, he confidently replied, "Oh no, there's no danger at all. We'll have enough people with us, and upon arrival you'll find a comfortable hotel awaiting you." I asked the question that had been bothering me the most. If a sakura tree that blooms year-round is such a unique phenomenon, why do so few people, even here on the island, know about it? I understand your puzzlement. The thing is, our grove is also a sacred place, traditionally opened for visits only once every few decades. That's why so few people know about it. This is indeed a unique opportunity for you to witness this wonder with your own eyes. Stepping back a bit, we gathered in a circle to discuss the offer. Tanaka was full of enthusiasm as we were presented with a chance to see the very plant that had mysteriously manifested itself in the lab. Haruko also supported the idea, as opportunities like this were rare. It was only I who hesitated, feeling a slight unease about the situation. The entire conversation seemed too good to be true. In the end, we decided to embark on the journey. While Haruko delved into the details with the tour organizer and inquired about the prices, we got distracted by the performance of the second man in the mask. His dance exuded magnetism and mystery, and when his gaze met ours, it seemed like a sly smile flickered beneath the mask. Suddenly interrupting his act, he effortlessly leapt towards us, stooped down, and asked a question in impeccable English. "Before we depart, wouldn't you like to see something truly interesting?" "And what might that be?" I asked with curiosity. "You'll see for yourselves. Just follow me into this alley," he mysteriously proposed. "Aren't you planning to rob us there?" I asked with some caution. "Oh no, how could you think such a thing of me?" The man in the mask playfully clasped his hands over his heart, feigning offense. "I'm nothing but good-hearted," he declared, chuckling. Tanaka and I exchanged doubtful glances, but curiosity got the better of us. Choosing to follow this eccentric guide, we headed toward the indicated alley. Our new acquaintance, already walking ahead without looking back, seemed confident in our decision to follow him. Upon entering the narrow alley, we soon noticed that we were surrounded by deep semi-darkness, and, to our surprise, there was not a soul in sight. Only a solitary lantern cast a dim glow, as if it were about to extinguish at any moment. Following our unusual guide, we suddenly stopped at an even narrower passage where only a couple of people could barely squeeze through. The man pointed to something in the darkness which we could hardly see, so we approached to get a closer look. At that moment, the lantern started flickering even more intensely and abruptly went out, enveloping us in thick darkness. I felt fear creeping in. When I turned to look back, I noticed that the man in the mask was still standing behind us, his arms crossed over his chest. My attention was diverted by the fact that Tanaka had started tugging at my sleeve. When I turned to him, his face was pale with fear, and he pointed deeper into the dark alley. Staring intently, I could just make out a creature resembling a goblin with an unnaturally long tongue, which it dragged through a pile of trash with evident pleasure. The creature licked and devoured the remnants from cans, emitting contented sounds. When its gaze met ours, it froze in surprise, then displayed a wicked grin and began moving slowly in our direction. We stood rooted to the spot, paralyzed by shock and disbelief. Tanaka, appearing ready to bolt at any moment, asked me with a trembling voice if we should continue on this path. Caught in hesitation myself, I couldn't provide a clear answer. In the silence, Haruko's voice suddenly interrupted our confusion. "What are you doing here?" Her displeased expression caught us off guard. Turning around to look back at the alley, we found that the creature had mysteriously vanished, and the lantern had brightly illuminated again. The man in the mask burst into loud laughter, slicing through the night's silence. He began dancing as if underscoring his playful role, and then headed towards the exit of the alley. His words, thrown over his shoulder, sounded almost challenging. "We're just having fun, nothing more." We stood there, astonished and frightened by the incident in the alley. Haruko, placing her hands on our shoulders, reminded us that time was of the essence, and we needed to proceed. Tanaka, still frozen in place with a pale face and downcast eyes, questioned me with doubt in his voice, wondering if we should continue on this path. I caught myself hesitating in my response. Our guide, standing a bit ahead of us, seemed impatient, perhaps preferring to leave us to our own contemplation of the mystical and unexplained events. Following Haruka, we approached a small bus that was already nearly full of passengers. Inside, I counted around 13 people. We managed to find seats at the back of the bus and settled in comfortably. After a short while, Kitsune in his suit and his ominous partner Yami also took their seats at the front, and the bus smoothly started moving. To our surprise, instead of heading towards the mountains, we were heading towards the port. Upon arrival, Kitsune explained that it would be quicker and easier to reach our destination by boat. We descended to the pier where a large fishing boat awaited us, equipped with handrails and rows of seats along the sides. Taking our seats, we held onto the handrails tightly. The boat started with some difficulty, and we set off on our journey. A gentle breeze pleasantly cooled our faces, and although night had fallen over the island, the full moon brightly illuminated our voyage, adding a touch of mystical beauty to the scenery. My attention was drawn to glowing streaks beneath the water, resembling playful dolphins following the boat. Pointing at them to Haruka, I was surprised when she admitted that she couldn't see anything. Only Tanaka confirmed my observations. Could it be that some sort of hypnosis or the influence of an unknown gas was still affecting us? After half an hour, we approached another shore where a small pier awaited us. The sandy beach gently met the edge of the sea, and the trees seemed to emerge directly from the water, creating a secluded and almost fairy tale-like landscape. The pier welcomed us with lanterns whose lights stretched along the path leading straight into the mountains. The impressed passengers from the boat couldn't conceal their amazement at such grandeur. I, too, felt awe-struck, standing before this breathtaking sight. After docking, we disembarked and, forming a long line, headed towards the mountains. Our path led us along a trail winding through the trees bordered by ropes. Rows of lanterns hung on both sides of the trail, casting a soft light to guide our way. After about an hour and a half of walking, and astounded by the number of lanterns installed for just a dozen travelers, we finally reached the hotel situated at the foot of the mountain. The hotel was a cozy two-story building, designed in a traditional style with a tiled roof that glistened beautifully in the moonlight. The facade was adorned with wood carvings depicting elements of the local flora and fauna, giving the building a unique charm. Around the hotel, a small but well-kept garden featured stone pathways leading to the entrance and low bushes carefully pruned into animal shapes. At the entrance to the hotel, an elderly man greeted us. With a respectful bow, he escorted us to our rooms. I couldn't help but notice that his gaze lingered on Tanaka for a moment with slight surprise, a detail that didn't escape my friend's notice either. Tanaka suddenly tensed, as if long-forgotten memories had been triggered in his mind. After we settled in our rooms, I took the opportunity to freshen up in the shower. When I decided to visit Tanaka, I found him deep in thought, sitting on the bed. Approaching him, I asked what he was thinking about. Tanaka shared his doubts with me, asserting that the face of the man at the entrance had seemed familiar to him. He suddenly pulled out his wallet and retrieved an old black-and-white photograph, which he then showed me. On the photo, a young couple held a child in their arms, with what appeared to be their parents standing beside them. "That's him for sure," Tanaka confidently declared, pointing to one of the men in the photo. Upon closer examination, I recognized the man in the photograph as the same elderly man at the entrance. Despite the years leaving their mark on his face, his features remained recognizable. Tanaka told me that the man in the photo was his paternal grandfather, who had disappeared when Tanaka was still a child. He knew him only from old photographs. The discovery had shaken Tanaka to the core, and he sat there as if in shock. I wondered if this very grandfather could have sent the sakura petal. At that moment, our conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. I stood up, opened it, and saw the elderly man standing in the doorway, the same man we had just been discussing. He nervously glanced around and asked if he could enter. I let him in, and Tanaka got up to greet him. Recognizing his grandson, the old man couldn't hold back his tears and embraced him tightly. When the emotions settled a bit, he expressed his surprise at seeing us and inquired about how we ended up here and what brought us to this place. We told him about the sakura petal, and his expression changed abruptly. He solemnly warned us that we were in danger and needed to leave immediately. Tanaka was about to ask questions, but Kitsune, who had appeared in the doorway, interrupted our conversation. He sternly questioned why the old man was here. "What are you doing here, old man? Go! Your clients are waiting for you," he said firmly. The old man, frightened, bowed and quickly made his way to the exit. After the departure of the old man and Kitsune, Haruka entered our room looking concerned and asked what had happened. We shared everything that had transpired and our concerns about the current situation. We concluded that something truly mysterious and potentially dangerous was happening beneath the surface of this picturesque journey. It was clear that behind the facade of a scenic trip and beautiful landscapes lay a deep enigma that required our investigation. At dawn the following day, around 8 in the morning, we were awakened. We headed to the dining hall, where breakfast awaited us. It became evident that only one person worked at the hotel, Tanaka's grandfather. After the events of the previous evening, he pretended as if he didn't know us and actively avoided our attention. It deeply saddened Tanaka to see his own grandfather working here. After finishing breakfast, we stepped out onto the courtyard in front of the hotel. There, Kitsune was waiting for us in his usual business suit, which was quite surprising given the attire for our upcoming mountain journey. One of the tourists asked when we would head into the forest. Kitsune explained that the gates to the forest would only open on the 3rd day of the festival, so we would be able to visit it tomorrow evening. Until then, he suggested we explore other attractions on the island. Soon, Yami, the mysterious man in the mask, joined us, and together we continued our journey. Following a narrow trail, passing by a babbling stream, and through dense cedar groves, we enjoyed the breathtaking views. Kitsune explained that our goal was to reach a waterfall. However, as we emerged into a spacious clearing, I encountered a sight that was far from ordinary. Coming toward us along the path was a white sphere with tiny legs. The creature had no eyes, just a huge mouth. When I turned to see if anyone else noticed it, it seemed that no one else did, except for Tanaka, who also stared at it with a shocked expression. To my surprise, Haruka, approaching from behind, pushed Tanaka, snapping him out of his trance. He glanced at me and nodded toward the creature, confirming that he could see it as well. However, Haruka, upon noticing our reactions, advised us to keep walking and not pay it any heed. It remained unclear whether she could see the creature or not. When the sphere reached our level, our guides nodded at it in greeting, and it responded in kind before continuing on its way. We followed Haruka's advice and continued walking, trying not to pay attention to our surroundings. When the creature stopped next to us, I felt it scrutinizing us suspiciously, but we kept ignoring it, and eventually it retreated. This allowed me to finally breathe freely. I couldn't help but think that we needed to leave this place as soon as possible. But when I looked at Tanaka, I understood that we couldn't abandon his family here. Upon reaching the waterfall, we discovered its incredible beauty. The other tourists scattered around, which gave us an opportunity to talk. We approached Haruka to get her opinion on what had happened, but she just smiled mysteriously, pretending not to understand what we were talking about. We continued to question her, but she continued to deny everything. The day passed without further supernatural incidents. Our guides took us to a few more interesting places, and we returned to the hotel. The next day had no scheduled activities, as our much-anticipated excursion to the Sakura forest was in the evening. In anticipation of this event, each of us decided to spend the day in our own way. Haruka mentioned that she needed to check some things and disappeared for the entire day. Tanaka attempted to make contact with Hiroshi, his grandfather, but the old man avoided meeting him. I went for a walk in the forest and then descended to the pier, trying to explore potential escape routes as my unease persisted. All signs pointed to something dark and inexplicable lurking beneath the surface of this picturesque journey, and I tried to decipher what awaited us. Exhausted by my thoughts, I found a place to rest under a tree near the trail. Lost in contemplation about the upcoming events, I suddenly heard voices in the distance. Among them, I recognized the distinctive tone of Yami, the man in the mask. I couldn't discern with whom he was speaking or what they were discussing. You know, that old man Hiroshi couldn't stop bragging about his grandson. He bored me with his stories. Do you think I left everything as it is? Of course not. I brought his grandson right to him to surprise the old man. You should have seen his face at that moment. Yami was laughing as he spoke, and their laughter gradually faded into the distance. Hearing these words, a puzzle began to form in my mind. So, this is the person who sent the Sakura petal. But the question remained. How did he know where to find Hiroshi's grandson? And how did he know what Tanaka did for a living? If he were an ordinary person, he might have thrown that letter away. It appeared that these individuals knew a lot, making them even more dangerous. Returning to the hotel, I immediately shared my observations with Tanaka. After hearing the conversation about Yami and Hiroshi, we concluded that as soon as the opportunity arose, we needed to leave this place. Evening was approaching, and soon Haruka returned, choosing to keep her whereabouts a secret. All the guests gathered in front of the hotel, filled with anticipation of seeing the Sakura forest. Without much delay, our familiar pair of guides led us to the base of the mountain. As we were about to set off, the old man approached us discreetly. With caution, he handed us a silver knife. Then, without a word, he slowly turned and walked away, leaving us in contemplation. Haruka quickly approached Tanaka, skillfully took the silver knife from him, and discreetly stashed it away. Her actions caught us off guard, but we refrained from asking questions. Understanding that every moment counted, we collected our thoughts and followed the others. The path was illuminated by lanterns, and in the sky, the full moon shone majestically, casting its mysterious light all around. The ascent was long, but eventually we left the cedar forests behind, and in front of us stood ancient gates with intricate carvings. Next to them were wooden statues of a cat and a fox no taller than a human. Kitsune, approaching the gates, knocked on them and bowed, after which they creaked open by themselves, eliciting awe from the tourists. Before us lay the sakura forest, filled with Japanese cherry trees with dark burgundy trunks and delicately pink petals swaying gracefully in the wind. Witnessing such a scene in the middle of August was truly astonishing. As the guests dispersed through the garden, taking photographs of the surrounding beauty, I approached one of the trees, trying to determine if it was the same kind we had studied in the laboratory. After a thorough examination, I found nothing unusual and attempted to pluck a petal. However, my attempt was in vain. The petal wouldn't yield, giving the impression that I was tugging at an artificial flower from a store. I then tried to break a branch, but it bent like rubber and returned to its original position. Calling Tanaka, I shared my observations about the unusual properties of the tree. Together, we were surprised as we examined it, trying to unravel the mystery of its origin. Our contemplations were interrupted by Kitsune, who invited us to join the upcoming ritual. We arrived at an open circular platform surrounded by cherry blossoms. In the center stood an altar with a bowl filled with clear liquid. Around the altar were low pillars adorned with burning candles. We were positioned around the altar in a circle with the other guests. Haruka stood beside me, and next to her was Tanaka. Once everyone had taken their places, Yami, the masked man, began to perform a ritual dance around the altar to the accompaniment of sudden drum beats. Then, Kitsune approached the bowl and began to chant a melody in an unfamiliar language, different from Japanese. This procession captivated the tourists in attendance. When the chanting ceased, Kitsune addressed the gathered crowd in Japanese, starting to tell the story associated with the ritual. Haruka promptly began translating his words. This grove is one of the oldest and most sacred places on our island. According to legend, it emerged here over 1,000 years ago and has since been an object of deep reverence. The ancients believed that the grove embodies a deity, bestowing favor and protection on those who serve it, providing not only spiritual but also material prosperity. As Kitsune spoke, I couldn't help but notice that the candle flames around the altar were extinguishing one by one, as if under the influence of an unseen force. Turning to my companions to gauge their reactions, my attention was drawn to Haruka, who was gazing at the bowl on the altar. I noticed that the clear liquid in the bowl was becoming cloudy, gradually taking on a rosy hue. Kitsune continued. However, the most remarkable feature of this grove is its ability to produce a unique fruit. Once every 500 years, under the rare alignment of stars, one of the trees in the grove blooms and bears fruit, gifting only one fruit. From this fruit, according to legends, a legendary being may be born, possessing extraordinary wisdom and magical abilities. As the candle flames continued to extinguish one by one, leaving only a few faint glimmers, the liquid in the bowl turned a deep red, growing darker with each passing second. A growing sense of tension and an anticipation of something unknown sent shivers down my spine. Suddenly, Haruka leaned towards me. In her eyes, I saw worry and incipient panic. Speaking quietly to avoid being overheard, she warned us to be prepared to flee. I already had an intuitive sense that danger was approaching and was ready for action. Kitsune, seemingly in a state of ecstasy, continued his ritual. Spreading his arms and raising them to the sky, he declared, "And now I shall say that soon, our mother will grant us a brother or sister, and you have been chosen to be the key to this event." Just as his words dissipated into the air, a strong wind suddenly arose, quickly snuffing out the last candle. The lanterns surrounding us also went out one after another, leaving us in complete darkness, except for the cold light of the moon rising in the night sky above us. Then a piercing cry of pain rang out. At first, it was a desperate female voice calling for help, followed by a male scream. A horrifying scene unfolded before me. The branches of the cherry blossoms transformed into thread-like appendages, ensnaring and piercing one person after another, draining their life force. The panicked cries and screams created a terrifying tableau as people attempted to flee, but the bloodthirsty branches reached them wherever they went. At that moment, Haruka decisively grabbed me and pulled me towards the exit. Tanaka and I, focused on escaping, put all our strength into breaking free from this nightmare. However, when one of the branches seized me, I couldn't help but cry out. Haruka swiftly drew a silver knife from her pouch and cut the branch, freeing me. We continued our desperate escape, leaving behind the screams and chaos. Every step we took was fraught with fear and horror at the unfolding nightmare. The cherry blossoms, transformed into predatory entities, relentlessly pursued anyone within their reach. Exhausted but fueled by adrenaline, we raced forward, all the while fearing that death might catch up to us. In the end, we managed to break free from the nightmare, passing through the gates. We didn't stop, but kept running. We were powerless to help those who remained in the grove. Haruka looked at us with a mixture of sorrow and determination, saying, "I should have realized sooner that the grove has a life of its own. Perhaps then, we could have saved more lives." We exchanged bewildered looks, full of questions for her. But before we could ask, Kitsune suddenly appeared from the darkness. He gazed at us with calm curiosity before saying, "It's amazing that you managed to survive. Girl, I didn't like you from the start, but that's even better. Now I have a snack as well." Suddenly his body began to convulse and his clothes tore apart, revealing a body covered in fur. His face elongated, taking on animalistic features, and enormous sharp teeth grew from his mouth. Before us stood a werewolf, resembling a humanoid fox. He prepared to leap, preparing to attack, when suddenly Haruka appeared before us. Without looking back, she sternly ordered us to leave the island immediately. Barely finishing her sentence, Haruka began to undergo her own transformation. Tanaka and I watched in astonishment and shock as a creature, slightly smaller than a human but significantly larger than an ordinary tanuki, materialized before us. It seemed that even Kitsune was taken by surprise by this transformation, but he quickly regained his composure, growled, and directed his aggression towards Haruka. A fierce battle erupted between them, a horrifying sight to behold. At this critical moment, Tanaka grabbed my hand and pulled me towards the pier. In passing, I noticed a silver knife lying nearby, picked it up, and followed Tanaka, carrying the cold weapon with us in case of a new, unexpected challenge on our path to safety. We ran down the trail, grateful that it was impossible to get lost here. When we were getting close to the hotel, we heard a commotion behind us and increased our pace out of fear. Upon reaching the hotel, Tanaka began calling for his grandfather. However, suddenly Yami, the masked man, landed in front of us. With a malevolent look, he addressed us. "Where are you rushing to, my friends? I haven't finished playing with you yet." With these words, he removed his mask, revealing the grotesque, wickedly grinning face of a cat. In the next moment, he swiftly seized Tanaka and lifted him into the air with one hand. I rushed at him with the knife, but he easily pushed me back with a powerful kick, sending the knife tumbling aside. As Yami raised his other hand to strike, I thought it was the end. But then from behind, the old man leaped at him, armed with the same silver knife. With determination, he plunged it into the monster's chest. Yami howled and tossed Tanaka aside. Rushing to my friend's aid, I helped him up while the old man, not letting go of Yami, continued to stab him with the knife. The monster roared in pain, but the old man held him firmly, shouting at us, "Run!" Tears streamed from his eyes as he added, "Forgive me for bringing you here." In desperation, Tanaka let out a piercing cry as the monster, with a powerful leap, carried the old man into the depths of the dark bushes. Rage and pain were evident in his voice. I patted him on the shoulder, offering my sympathy, and said it was time for us to leave. We quickly reached the pier where a boat came into view, our only chance for salvation. Without hesitation, we jumped into it, untied it, and sailed away from the shore. As we left the island, we couldn't tear our eyes away from its ominous contours, shrouded in the darkness of the night. Thoughts of Haruka and Tanaka's grandfather swirled in our heads. We wondered if they had survived and what their fate had been after our escape. The answers remained beyond our comprehension, veiled in the mist of uncertainty. On this night, as we sailed further and further away, we left behind not only the enigmatic forests of the island, but also a part of our hearts filled with concern for the fate of those we had to leave behind. So, as we sailed away, we silently shared the bitterness of loss and the hope for a new day that might bring answers to our tormenting questions.
Story 3.
The deep night enveloped the world around me as I sat on the couch, lost in my thoughts, staring at the envelope I unexpectedly found in my mailbox. Though the couch was soft, it felt hard at that moment, as if it were made of concrete. That's how tense I was. The reason for my tension was the sender of the letter, my grandfather, whom I hadn't communicated with for a long time. Deep down, I felt doubts and fears, hindering me from tearing open the thick paper of the envelope. Yet my hands, as if separate entities from me, nervously clutched it. Overcoming the moment of hesitation, I stood up, carefully placed the letter on the table, and headed to the kitchen. I needed a drink. Opening the fridge, I found it almost empty, except for a couple of beer cans. I need to go shopping, a thought flashed through my mind. With a characteristic hiss, I opened one of the cans and drank it in one gulp, then took the second one and returned to the living room with it in my hand. The light in the house was bright, but the air felt filled with anxiety and an inevitable anticipation of some news that the letter was supposed to bring. Setting aside the beer, I finally mustered the courage and unfolded the envelope. Inside awaited an invitation from my grandfather to visit him at his country house for his 80th birthday. The message was succinct, without extra words, questions, or wishes. After rereading it several times and confirming that there was no other content there, I crumpled the paper and threw it away. Sinking back onto the couch, I sighed deeply and delved into my thoughts. What could have prompted my grandfather to invite me? What does he expect from our meeting? Perhaps he sensed the approach of the end and wanted to leave me something important as a legacy. Various conjectures and assumptions about the upcoming meeting began to form in my mind. Despite my grandfather's immense wealth, I had never thirsted for his riches. Suddenly, the rain starting outside seemed to underscore my inner melancholy. Inspired by the moment, I got up and approached the table to pick up an old photograph. It depicted a young boy and a woman, mother and son, radiating sincere happiness. As if echoing my contemplations, the phone suddenly rang. Glancing at the display confirmed my suspicions. It was John, my one true friend. We had met while working at the local factory, and since then, we had maintained a strong bond, especially after the recent loss of my father, leaving only him by my side. I answered the call. "Hello, John?" I began. "David!" he exclaimed enthusiastically in response, his voice sounding as if his mood today was particularly uplifted. "How are you, buddy? Did you miss me? Although we haven't seen each other for just a day, you missed me, right? And you know who else missed you, and it's not me. Imagine. Remember Sarah from Demi's Diner? She said she wouldn't mind going to the movies with her friend and inviting us. So are you interested?" "Wait," I tried to stop him, as if trying to dam the verbal waterfall. "Maybe another time." I told him about the unexpected letter from my grandfather. John listened attentively to my story, then declared that he would be with me soon. Approximately 10 minutes later, the front door opened and John appeared on the threshold with a pack of beer. He took out a couple of cans, handed one to me, sat down on the couch, and asked me to tell him more. After my brief explanation, he didn't conceal his surprise. "So you mean to tell me you have a grandfather on your mother's side whom you haven't communicated with for years, and he suddenly invites you over? And moreover, he's incredibly wealthy?" I just nodded in response. Then John, full of enthusiasm, jumped up and exclaimed, "There's no need to think, buddy. You should go. Befriend your grandfather. And there's your fortune. You won't have to work at that factory anymore. My eyes are already shining at the thought of your wealth. If anything, I'm with you. We'll take a day off and have a blast at your grandfather's place." My doubts were understandable. John spoke about it lightly because he didn't know my grandfather personally. However, curiosity outweighed in me. I wanted to find out why my grandfather decided to reach out to me after all these years of silence. So, despite my hesitations, the decision was made to go to my grandfather. John and I spent a couple more hours enjoying beer and conversation, then agreed that the day after tomorrow we would set off together. When my friend left, the house fell silent. Left alone with my thoughts and anticipation of the upcoming adventure, I decided it was time to rest. As I lay in bed, I slowly drifted into sleep, pondering the upcoming meeting with my grandfather. Questions and conjectures swirled in my mind about what he might say to me and how this meeting would affect my future. The night promised to be restless, full of dreams and anticipation of the new day. John arrived at dawn, as the first rays of sunlight were barely breaking through the morning mist. His old, weathered Ford pickup truck was ready for the long journey we had planned. The day before, we managed to persuade our boss to give us a couple of days off. He looked at us with a hint of disapproval, yet still agreed. Thanks to our diligent work and the absence of problems on our part, he compromised. We gathered our things easily. Neatly packed suits for the meeting were lying in the suitcase, and we also took a small supply of food for the road and a couple of cans of cola. We needed to drive to the neighboring state, and if we needed anything, we could purchase it along the way. The morning was still early, and many neighbors likely hadn't woken up yet when I, yawning, transferred the suitcase to the back seat of the pickup truck. After making sure everything at home was turned off and locked, I got into the car. The vehicle roared to life with a loud rumble, thanks to a special muffler that John installed to mimic the sound of a semi-truck. Guiltily, I glanced around, thinking that surely this noise had awakened everyone in the neighborhood. John confidently pressed the gas, and we set off heading towards the highway. The road traversed through changing landscapes, starting from dense forests, the greenery of which contrasted vividly with the gray asphalt, to open fields where the first rays of sunlight playfully reflected off dewdrops, resembling millions of tiny stars fallen to earth. We passed through small towns, each with its unique architecture and character, where morning life was just beginning to stir. People rushed to work, the first cafes opened, and more cars appeared on the roads. Opening the window, I felt a pleasant, warm breeze on my face. In the silence, interrupted only by the noise of the road, my thoughts turned to the upcoming meeting. Involuntarily, they carried me far into the past, to one of the biggest mysteries and tragedies of my life, the disappearance of my mother. I was only 10 years old when she vanished without a trace. All efforts to find her proved futile. There was a theory that she might have gotten lost in the woods or even fallen victim to a wild animal, but no evidence was ever found. This event forever changed our family, leaving a deep scar on my father's heart. At first, he tried to numb the pain with alcohol, but then he gathered his strength and single-handedly raised me. I can't say that my life was perfect, but neither was it entirely unhappy. I also longed for my mother, especially when my father sent me to my grandfather's for the summer. Those visits left me with not the warmest memories, as my grandfather hardly interacted with me, leaving me alone in his city house. Although he had another house outside the city, I had never been there. Lost in thoughts of the past, I didn't notice how time flew by. We crossed the state border, and soon we were supposed to arrive in the town where my grandfather lived. Arriving in the designated town, we immediately felt its provincial spirit. A place where life flowed in its measured rhythm, where everyone knew everyone and news spread astonishingly fast. This small American town resembled scenes from movies about old-fashioned America, where on the main street, stores had been operating for decades under the same sign, and familiar faces could always be encountered at intersections. Deciding to grab a bite, we headed to a local diner, which seemed like the perfect place not only for lunch, but also to gather the necessary information. The diner was exactly like something out of the cult movie Pulp Fiction, with its unique atmosphere and the spirit of old America. In the parking lot, there were a couple of chrome bikes and several cars, adding a special flavor to the place. Approaching the cafe, we entered inside and immediately found a cozy table. Before we could settle in, the waitress approached us. She was a middle-aged woman with a friendly face and a welcoming smile, dressed in a cute apron. Her name tag proudly displayed the name Becky. With warmth in her gaze, she handed us the menus. I ordered toast with coffee, preferring to start the day with a classic and simple breakfast, while John chose scrambled eggs. Both of us were geared towards pleasant conversation and a tasty lunch as we observed our surroundings, trying to absorb the atmosphere of this small town and its inhabitants. Around us there was an atmosphere of tranquility and homely comfort, so characteristic of small American towns where each day resembled the previous one, and small joys became noticeable and significant. The waitress took our order and was about to leave when John asked her, "Could you please tell us how to get to Mr. Fletcher's country house?" The waitress replied, "Oh, perhaps you're invited to his event. Let me show you," she said enthusiastically, pulling out her smartphone. A map quickly appeared on the screen with the location precisely marked. "It's not far, about half an hour's drive from here. I envy you being invited. Mr. Fletcher is quite a celebrity in our town. Surely, all the most important people from our town will be there. Are you related to him in any way?" "Yes, he's his grandson," John blurted out, pointing at me. "Really? Your grandfather is a wonderful person. He's done so much for our town. You know, we have a shelter for the homeless, and he fully funded its repair, not to mention his generous donations to the town treasury. And in winter, he dresses up as Santa Claus and visits the homes of the needy, bringing them joy. Yes, he's done so much good. You should be proud of your grandfather, young man." Awkwardly scratching my nose and nodding slightly, I felt uncomfortable with the sudden attention on me. At that moment, 2 police officers entered the diner. The first, a man of about 45 with flecks of gray in his hair, was a man of short stature with a kindly expression on his face. His companion, likely a younger assistant, looked about 30, with chestnut curls and a face dotted with freckles. Becky went over to them with a warm smile. "Hello, Becky. As usual," the first man who entered said. "Why do you both look so concerned today? Has something happened?" Becky asked with curiosity. "People are disappearing again in neighboring towns. The sheriff's requested our help in the search. Thank God everything's quiet here for now." We couldn't help but listen. "Oh my God, how many people have gone missing already? I heard this wave of disappearances started just a week ago." Disappearances have happened before, but this time, within a short period, 10 people have gone missing, and all of them were of a fairly advanced age, the sheriff replied, taking off his hat and sitting down. "I have a feeling something sinister is looming." Becky nodded with concern and went to fulfill the order. John and I exchanged glances, after which he quietly asked, "Listen, you said your grandfather was a pretty tough guy. How come everyone speaks so highly of him?" I didn't answer. After all, it was my grandfather's two-faced behavior that caused my negative attitude towards him. It seemed that only I and his personal assistant, who worked for him at home, knew about it. In the presence of others, my grandfather always showed friendliness. But as soon as they left, he dropped the mask and revealed his true face, grim and full of malice. This transformation was terrifying, and what's worse, he never tried to hide it from me. After lunch, we continued our journey. The road to my grandfather's country house passed without any special events. Passing through this typical provincial town, which didn't particularly interest us, we finally arrived at our destination. Pulling up to the house, we noticed several cars already parked opposite. Leaving our car, we got out and surveyed the area. John even whistled with surprise and admiration. Before us stood a huge 3-story mansion, as if taken from a book about magnificent architectural masterpieces. The building, adorned with intricate stone carvings and decorative elements, impressed with its size and nobility. Its facade, painted in warm pastel tones, harmoniously blended into the surrounding landscape. Large panoramic windows on each floor allowed daylight to penetrate freely inside, giving the building a special charm and coziness. Around the mansion was a neatly trimmed lawn, on which elegant bushes and flower beds were arranged as if by a ruler, adorned with a variety of flowers and decorative plants. Compositions of greenery and flowers created a cozy and pleasant atmosphere, while winding paths invited you deeper into the garden, promising even more discoveries and beauty. We stood for a few moments, enjoying the view and grandeur of the place, before heading towards the mansion's front door. As soon as we raised our hand to knock, the door swung open instantly. Standing in the doorway was a woman about 40 years old, dressed in an elegant black, gray, and white dress. Her appearance was far from traditional standards of beauty, and her facial expression seemed distinctly unfriendly, giving her a sinister look. Her not too long hair was neatly gathered in a bun at the nape. It was Miss Olson, my grandfather's manager and personal assistant. I didn't know exactly how many years she had worked in this position, but I remembered her from my childhood when I used to visit my grandfather. Her stern, gloomy face hadn't changed since then, which only reinforced my impression of her. Unlike my grandfather, Miss Olson never tried to hide her true attitude towards others, which, in my opinion, made her a more sincere person. Her gaze slid over me, and she commented without a smile, "You've grown, David, but haven't gained any beauty." Then her attention shifted to John, and she added sharply, "And who's this? We certainly didn't invite him." "This is John, my friend. He's with me as a +1, I said, smiling in response to John's surprised look. Miss Olson paused for a moment, assessing the situation, then silently led us inside. Entering the house, we found ourselves in a luxurious hall, its walls adorned with exquisite paintings, while stately vases towered in the corners of the room. John looked around with delight and curiosity, not missing the opportunity to nudge me in the side and whisper in my ear that I supposedly hit the jackpot. Eventually, we were led to 2 adjacent rooms. Stepping into one of them, I found a cozy bedroom with a spacious bed flanked by bedside tables. Opposite the bed stood an imposing chest of drawers, completing the room's decor. "Make yourselves comfortable. The reception will start at 6 in the evening. I'll come and let you know. For now, just stay here," said the manager. "Wait, what about the meeting with grandfather?" "He's busy right now, so settle in for now. You'll talk to him in the evening." We nodded in agreement. John headed to his room, and I, opening my suitcase, pulled out an old suit inherited from my father. After that, I opened the chest of drawers, where I found everything I needed to iron my clothes. Carefully ironing the suit, I hung it up neatly and then lay down on the bed, contemplating the upcoming evening. Thoughts enveloped my consciousness, and I didn't even notice when I drifted off to sleep. In my dream, I returned to my childhood when I was 10 years old. I twirled around my mom, pleading with her for something with childish persistence. "Mom, let's go for a walk. I want to explore the forest again." "No, son, it's too late. What if we get lost?" I continued to beg her, constantly tugging at her long white dress, and eventually she agreed. After a while, we stood in front of the forest, and as I tried to enter it, someone knocked heavily on the door. "Young master, it's time to go. The dinner party will start soon." I woke up. Before me was a gray ceiling and an elegant chandelier. My heart was pounding wildly. Was it a dream or a memory? Trying to figure it out, I felt a sharp headache. Rubbing my eyes, I headed to the bathroom, freshened up, and, putting on my suit, went down to the hall. There, John was already waiting for me, elegantly dressed with a bow tie around his neck. His unusual look, for him, tried to bring a smile to my face, but my heart continued to beat furiously. Descending downstairs, we found ourselves in the main hall, where a multitude of guests had already gathered. The spacious room impressed with its magnificence. High ceilings supported luxurious chandeliers emitting warm light, which softly illuminated the entire hall. The walls were adorned with exquisite paintings and draperies, giving the interior a special charm and nobility. In the center of the hall stood an elegant stage for performances, surrounded by rows of neatly arranged tables with stylish table settings. We walked past the guests, not knowing anyone, but politely nodding in response to their greetings. Miss Olson had disappeared, busy with her own affairs, and we headed to the buffet table. Treating myself to light snacks, I washed it down with a glass of champagne. John and I stood there for a while, observing the proceedings. When my grandfather entered the hall, everyone's attention immediately focused on him. It had been a long time since our last meeting, and I immediately noticed how he had changed. Once full of strength and health, his face now seemed tired and weakened. Nevertheless, his smile remained unchanged, warmly greeting everyone. His entrance was greeted with welcoming applause, to which he waved his hand shyly, as if to say, "This wasn't necessary for me," and proceeded to the center of the hall. There, he was awaited by a man in an elegant suit, who warmly welcomed my grandfather, and began to speak. Dear guests, today we have gathered here to pay tribute to our dear friend, the honorable citizen of our city, the inspiration and unsurpassed generous soul of our society, he began, then paused and applauded before continuing. Let us express our best wishes for his longevity. And as the mayor of our city, I am pleased to present him with an award for his outstanding merits. After these words, he was handed an exquisite red box, from which he took out a beautiful medal and carefully pinned it to my grandfather's chest. Then he raised his glass and drank, inviting all present to follow his example. After my grandfather drank the champagne and surveyed the guests, he spoke. Thank you for sharing this event with me and for your acknowledgement. At that moment, his gaze fell on me. I noticed a fleeting disappearance of the smile from his face, but soon it returned as he beckoned me to him. With some reluctance, I approached my grandfather, feeling the attention of everyone present. Today, I want to share some news with you all. My years are coming to an end and I have little time left. That's why I've decided to pass on all my inheritance to my only relative, my grandson. I stood rooted to the spot, trying to make sense of what I had just heard, when I heard hesitant applause. Turning around, I noticed John starting to clap, winking at me and gesturing, "It's all good." Soon, other guests joined in with applause, creating a wave of enthusiastic claps. My eyes met my grandfather's. He touched my arm and quietly said we would discuss everything later, then raised his glass and walked over to the mayor. Returning to John, I tried to gather my thoughts. The evening continued. Different people approached, congratulating me, wishing my grandfather well. And I, nodding gratefully, couldn't take my eyes off my grandfather, pondering his intentions. As the event came to an end and the guests began to disperse, my grandfather disappeared somewhere with the mayor. Miss Olson approached us and escorted us back to our rooms. I never had the opportunity to talk to my grandfather. After washing up and changing clothes, I lay down in bed. It didn't take long before I fell asleep. I suddenly woke up in the middle of the night, feeling as if the air in my lungs had turned to lead and my body refused to obey. Complete helplessness and engulfing fear made even the slightest movement impossible. The silence around me was so absolute it felt tangible. Suddenly I felt an inexplicable pressure on my legs, slowly but surely moving and settling between them. My heart pounded wildly. I attempted to sit up to see the cause of my fear, hoping it was just John playing a prank. However, in the darkness I could only make out a vague outline at my feet. At first, I thought it was a dog, but then I realized it couldn't be. The creature was too large. Fear made me lie back down, paralyzed by the thought that any movement could be fatal. After what felt like an eternity, the mysterious creature stood up, and my eyes, accustomed to the darkness, could discern its silhouette. It was a gaunt and contorted creature, reminiscent of aliens from the movie Signs with Mel Gibson. It slowly walked to the door and disappeared behind it. My heart raced insanely. I struggled to regain control of my paralyzed body. Gradually, I managed to calm my breathing, and trying not to make a sound, I got up to check on John. I went out into the hallway where complete darkness reigned and illuminated the path with the flashlight on my phone. I tried to turn on the lights, but the house seemed to be without power. Under the flashlight's beam, I headed to John's room, my heart pounding as I opened the door. To my surprise and alarm, the room was empty. John was gone. Questions swirled in my head. What had happened? Where could John have gone? Remembering that creature, I felt that we were in trouble. Deciding to search the house for my friend, I continued down the hallway and stumbled upon the door to the garbage chute. Easily pushing it open, I saw a square shaft descending into the depths of the building. Recoiling, I moved on and began opening doors along the way. Behind them were bedrooms and closets, but they were empty. Continuing my journey, I reached the door at the end of the corridor. Opening it, I discovered a small laundry room with shelves filled with bedding and blankets along the walls. Illuminating the center of the room with my flashlight, I saw a washing machine covered in blood, from which a bloody stream flowed onto the floor. My hand trembled. I felt that something was on the machine, and despite the fear, I slowly raised the flashlight. A disgusting and terrifying creature covered in fur with long hair and a muzzle resembling a hyena stared back at me. Its long claws were the size of an adult man's index finger, and a row of sharp small teeth adorned its mouth. The creature had a long thin tail with a tuft at the end, which it slowly wagged. Its eyes gleamed, sending shivers down my spine. I felt like I'd lost the ability to think. My legs became weak. It was the most horrible creature I'd ever seen. Suddenly it bared its teeth and growled, then crouched, preparing to pounce. I managed to close the door before it leaped at me, beginning to beat against the door. I stood still for a moment and then fled. As I ran from the creature, I heard it crash against the door with a destructive roar. Realizing that my chances of escaping were slim, I remembered the door to the shaft. Speeding up, I soon found it, desperately squeezing inside, and suddenly found myself falling. I thought the end was inevitable, but suddenly the corner of the shaft changed, and I flew out into a room. Looking around, I noticed my phone had flown several meters away from me. Crawling over to it and illuminating the room, I realized I was in a windowless basement. The room was empty, but the walls were marred with scratches. Obviously, the creature had lived here. I hurried to leave to avoid a possible encounter with the monster, soon finding a door which fortunately was not locked. Exiting the room, I found myself in a corridor resembling catacombs with low ceilings and narrow passages illuminated by red lanterns. Choosing between directions, I felt a fresh draft from the left and headed in that direction. The corridor gradually widened, leading me into a large oval room. In its center stood a stone slab resembling a bed, all covered in blood. Next to it was a chain with a collar at one end. Illuminating the surrounding space with my flashlight, I shuddered in horror, seeing a severed human finger. Sweat poured from me, my heart pounded like crazy. And then in the distance I heard a knock. Thud, thud, thud. Overwhelmed with fear, I decided it was time to make a run for it. Finding a passage on the opposite side, I hurried towards it. Soon I came across a door, which fortunately was unlocked. Entering inside, I discovered a monitoring room equipped with a control panel and multiple screens hanging on the walls. Examining the contents of the screens, I noticed that the main one showed the room with the stone slab, while the others displayed footage from multiple cameras, showing seemingly elderly people lying apathetically in their beds. A shiver ran down my spine when I recognized John in one of the chambers. We needed to free him immediately and get out of this place. Thinking about calling the police, I glanced at my phone, which had no signal, probably because we were deep underground. Looking around for keys, I found a bunch hanging on a nail by the door. There was also a low cabinet in the room, where I found a pistol. Checking the safety, I tucked it into my waistband and left the room, heading down the corridor. Soon I encountered the doors of the dungeons, each with a small window with bars. Approaching one after another, I noticed the inhabitants of these dungeons, upon seeing me, started to cry out for help. All I could do was apologize and promise to return with assistance. Finally, I found John, who was in a semi-conscious state on the bed. Opening the door and hearing a familiar knock in the distance, I hurried, woke up my friend, and helped him stand, draping his arm over my shoulder. As we prepared to leave the dungeon, the creature suddenly appeared before us. Slowly backing away, I quietly closed the door behind me, laid John back on the bed, and peeked outside. The creature, roughly stepping, held someone's hand in its teeth, which swung in rhythm with its movements. Saliva mixed with blood dripped from its mouth. In its hand was a human leg with an iron ring around the ankle, presumably used to restrain victims before feeding them to the monster. The monster kept waving its leg, banging it against the walls, creating that ominous knocking sound. Entering the room, the creature began to look around. All the dungeon's inhabitants suddenly froze, and it became eerily quiet. I slid down and hid as well, waiting to see what would happen next. Locking the door, I retreated to the corner, barely allowing myself to breathe, while outside there were menacing rumblings and growls. The thought of recent disappearances of people in neighboring towns flashed through my mind. A chill ran down my spine at the thought that my grandfather could be involved in their abductions, feeding them to this horrifying creature. Suddenly, silence fell. Maybe the creature had left? Carefully rising, I peered out the little window in the door. Before I could take a good look around, the monster's face appeared inches from mine, enveloping me in waves of the stench of blood. Its cold eyes pierced into me, seeing me only as prey. I recoiled as the creature grabbed the bars with force, trying to break in. Thanks to the lock, the door withstood the pressure, and eventually the monster retreated. My heart was pounding wildly, but I dared to look outside again and saw the creature returning to the ominous room with the stone slab. This could be our chance to escape. Carefully helping John, who was beginning to regain consciousness, we left the chamber and started moving towards the opposite exit. Before us stretched a narrow corridor, at the end of which loomed a staircase. Hope flared up in us with renewed strength, and we hastened our steps. Climbing the stairs, we encountered a door. I had a bunch of keys, and I began feverishly trying them one by one. Desperation grew with each new key, but when I picked up the last one, my hands were trembling. Turning it, I heard the satisfying click. The door opened. We rushed into the corridor, checking each door on the way. One led to a pantry, another to a lounge area. Continuing towards the exit, we almost reached it when a familiar voice stopped us. "Wait, young man, it's too early for you to leave," came from behind. Turning around, we saw Miss Olson. In her hands was a shotgun aimed at us. "Your grandfather is waiting for you. He wants to talk to you. Please, follow me." With no other choice, we followed Miss Olson. Exiting the room, we found ourselves in the kitchen, which looked entirely ordinary. Then our path led through the hallway, and we climbed to the second floor. Before us was an imposing door, the entrance to my grandfather's office. Miss Olson knocked and invited us in. Inside awaited a spacious room, filled with bookcases and a large writing desk by the window, behind which sat my grandfather, engrossed in reading and enjoying a cigar. Approaching the desk, we drew his attention, and he, setting aside his book and extinguishing his cigar, slowly raised his gaze to us, an expression far from warmth on his face. "Well, grandson," he began, "it seems you have already realized that inheritance brings not only wealth but also problems. Taking care of that creature is now your responsibility too." My words burst out in a fit of anger. "Are you out of your mind? Why did you lock up John, wanted to feed him to that monster?" The smug smile on his face only fueled my rage. "You're abducting people and feeding them to this monster. Are you insane? What is going on here?" he replied, I had no choice. As you probably noticed, they were old people. I didn't feed the creature the young ones, but I still couldn't understand. Why? Why keep this creature in the basement? Grandfather's anger flared up instantly, his face contorted with malice. His eyes widened and he screamed, "It's all because of you. It's all your fault." I fell silent, lost in speculation about what I could have done wrong. Grandfather wanted to continue, but suddenly there was a loud noise from behind the door. Miss Olson exclaimed worriedly, "Sir, the creature has broken free. We need to do something to catch it." Grandfather chuckled knowingly, stood up, went to the cabinet and opened it. Inside lay a shotgun and a row of tranquilizer darts. He took the shotgun, loaded it, and headed outside, leaving us with Miss Olson. After some time, when the noise subsided, Grandfather still hadn't returned. Looking at John, I saw the reflection of horror on his face. "What's happening? What do we do now?" His gaze seemed to be a question without an answer. Miss Olson decided to go outside to find out what had happened, leaving us in uncertainty. Time dragged on slowly, and she also didn't return. Eventually, deciding to find out what was going on, I opened the door and peeked outside, but found no one. Suddenly, a piercing scream filled the air. It was Miss Olson's voice. Her cries sounded desperate, filled with horror and pleas for help. Without hesitation, I dashed towards the screams, grabbing the pistol. John followed me. We burst into the living room, where a menacing sight awaited me. The creature held Miss Olson's head in one hand and her body in the other. My legs weakened with horror, but I forced myself to act. I aimed the gun at the monster and fired. The bullet hit its arm, causing it to release the body. With irritation, the creature threw the head in my direction and made a powerful leap. I continued to shoot until I hit its leg, causing it to lose grip and fall to the ground. Preparing for a final shot, I suddenly heard Grandfather's cry. Turning around, I saw him bloodied, lying by the cabinet. He shouted to me, "Stop! Don't kill her! It's your mother!" I stopped, stunned, and turned to him. "What? My mother?" The words choked in my throat as I tried to make sense of his words in this nightmare. At that moment, when the world around seemed chaotic, I suddenly felt a headache and plunged into memories. I remembered the day I asked my mother to go for a walk in the woods with me. We were happy, breathing in the freshness of the forest air until something stirred in the bushes. Out of them sprang a creature, attacking my mother. She screamed for me to run, and despite my despair and tears, I obeyed her. Returning from the forest, I told Grandfather what had happened, and he rushed to help, but returned with her bloodied body, declaring her dead and blaming me for it. Awakening from my memories, I saw the creature lunge at me again. Unable to decide whether to shoot, I froze, waiting for its attack, but John intervened in time, knocking me down as the creature flew past. The pistol slipped from my hands, and John, grabbing it, began shooting at the creature until it stopped moving. I lay in shock, trying to come to my senses. My whole world had turned upside down, and realization dawned on me. John approached and helped me up. Then we went to Grandfather, trying to administer first aid to him, but it was too late. He grabbed my hand and pulled me close, then looked into my eyes and said, "I loved my daughter, but she died because of your whim. Why? Why couldn't you just stay home?" After that, I heard a loud thud. John struck the dying man on the cheek and said, "You sick bastard! What was the child guilty of? Why did you keep this creature all this time? This is no longer his mother." The old man wanted to object, but he was out of strength. His eyes remained open, and I reached out and closed them. Then I took out my phone and called the police. After some time, the cops arrived. I led them and showed them the body. Instead of the creature, there lay the body of a young woman. I looked at her and recognized my mother. Joy and relief were written on her face. Perhaps she had been suffering all this time and finally found peace. I couldn't bear the sight. I turned away, sat down, and vomited. John approached and helped me up. We explained the situation to the policeman and led him to the dungeon. The captives were rescued. The house was surrounded by police, and after giving our statements, we were temporarily detained to clarify the circumstances. Released after a day, we finally were able to go home, leaving behind the nightmare of this house and its secrets.